elections while appropriations have lapsed. Congress's failure to do our work, in my view, is inexcusable. We've got to come together, which means we've got to talk to one another, and it can't be about who's winning, who's losing, because right now those that are losing are the American people, including the first Americans across the country. So today we're going to hear about how government shutdowns and agency reductions in force impact Native communities. When federal employees are furloughed, the people responsible for carrying out the government's trust and treaty obligations are unable to do their jobs. This disrupts Native communities' access to essential federal resources and services. Tribes and Native leaders are reaching out for help, and they're being told, well, can't help you now, the government is not open. And all the while, Native parents who rely on SNAP are worrying about how to feed their families. Head Start renewal deadlines are approaching with no one to process them. Maintenance and repairs at healthcare facilities are stalled, and tribal governments are dipping into their limited savings if they haven't used them up already. We know how past government shutdowns have hurt Native communities. During the 2018 partial government shutdown, the Indian Health Service had no advance appropriations at the time, forcing tribes and tribal organizations to cut services, exhaust on-hand medical supplies, and even consider temporarily closing tribe healthcare facilities. So funding for IHS isn't a luxury. I think we know well, for many, it is a matter of life and death. And that's why back in 2013, we were able to introduce legislation to provide advanced appropriations for IHS. We knew then it was going to be a long haul, but it was the right thing to do. And in the FY23 appropriations bill, we finally secured advanced appropriations for most of the IHS accounts. So today, as healthcare facilities across the country continue operating with minimal disruption during the shutdown, I think we can see the real impact that that had. In 2025, we've also seen reductions in force, the RIFs, across many departments and agencies, affecting the administration of federal programs that Native communities rely on. The loss of employees with deep institutional knowledge and longstanding relationships with Native communities weakens the effectiveness of these crucial federal programs. On October 10th, additional RIF notices were issued. We're going to hear today about the impacts at the CDFI fund, which supports Native CDFIs in expanding economic opportunities in Indian country, at the Office of Indian Education and the Impact Aid Office, where cuts threaten education opportunities for Native students, and at HHS, where staff reductions to SAMHSA, HRSA, home programs that fill gaps left by IHS, especially when it comes to behavioral health. Now, not all of these offices have Indian or tribe in their names, but each plays a critical role in serving Native communities, and all are part of carrying out the federal government's trust and treaty responsibilities. I've consistently reminded agencies of the unique government-to-government relationship and that these obligations must be upheld, even in times of challenge. So, well, it must kind of a meeting under perhaps not the best circumstances right now. I do hope that today's hearing will be a productive one. We all want our government to work. We want our government to serve all the people of the United States, including our Native peoples. And as senators, I think it's our responsibility to listen and understand the day-to-day impacts that communities are facing during this shutdown, and that's what we intend to do here today. I'll now turn to the Vice Chair for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Murkowski, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. When the federal government shuts down, our trust and treaty and legal obligations do not vanish, but they are put at risk. Promises to provide health care, housing, education, and public safety, among so many other critical services, are all on the chopping block. Communities are scrambling to secure alternate or reserve funding just in case their federal funds fall through, and several tribes have already declared states of emergency due to the funding and service shortfalls. And it's not the first time. In 2018, we learned just how devastating a government shutdown is for Native communities. A few examples: general assistance payments for food, clothing, shelter, and utility needs of low-income Native individuals and families were suspended. Funding for foster care and long-term care for children and elders suspended. Funds for tribal operations suspended. During that shutdown, the president of the National Congress of American Indians, Jefferson Keel, warned us that, quote, Indian country cannot afford and America should not stand for another one. But here we are again. We're on day 29 of this government shutdown, on track to being the longest on record, and that is nothing to brag about, especially because it's no ordinary shutdown. This time, it's also on track to being the most damaging to federal workers. RIFs are happening right now across the federal government that are choking off funds and services promised to Native communities. As we speak, the Office of Indian Education staff at the Department of Education are receiving their RIF notices. Without these federal workers, Native education programs required by law could grind to a halt. It doesn't have to be this way. Punishing federal workers with pink slips is a choice. It is not a requirement under the Anti-Deficiency Act. It is not something that automatically occurs at the end of the federal fiscal year. This is a choice that has nothing to do with the fact that we are in a shutdown. This shutdown is robbing agencies of staff needed to carry out the trust obligations to American Indians, Native Hawaiians, and Alaska Natives. Native communities can't put federal funding to work or fully exercise their self-determination if their fiduciary, the United States government, is out of the office. Let me be clear what we're talking about here. Native programs are not DEI spending, they are not charity, they are the law. Attempting to cancel funds for Native programs, riffing more than 4,200 federal employees, and eliminating tribal consultation policies, that's not the United States government meeting its trust and legal obligations. It's this administration's attempt to resuscitate failed policies of termination. I look forward to this hearing and this discussion about how this is impacting Indian country and Alaska Natives and Native Hawaiians, and I thank you again for being willing to testify.
Thank you to our Vice Chair. We'll now turn to our witnesses. We have today the Honorable Vice Chairwoman Sarah Harris, who is the Secretary for United South and Eastern Tribes. She will be followed by Mr. Ben Mallot, who is the President of the Alaska Federation of Natives, Mr. Kerry Bird, who is the Board President for the National Indian Education Association, Mr. Pete Upton, who is the CEO of the Native CDFI Network, and Mr. A.C. Locklear, who is the CEO of the National Indian Health Board. I want to thank you all for taking the time to be before the committee today. I want to single out my friend Ben Mallot, who has had a very busy week up in Alaska, actually busy weeks. We had a major disaster in Western Alaska during this shutdown. I also want to recognize Willie Nunn, all of the FEMA personnel who have surged up to the state, working around the clock on recovery operations, and again, all without pay. I'm very, very grateful for their dedication, and for all the federal employees who are coordinating with the tribes and the tribal organizations, the state. My team's been in there as we're all working to deliver services to those that have been displaced. So know that we continue to keep our attention there. I want to remind the witnesses that we have your full written testimony. It will be made part of the official record. We'd ask you to keep your oral testimony to no more than 5 minutes, so we've got time for questions from members. And I've shared with some of you, we anticipate having a vote here somewhere in the 2:15, 2:30 period. So you'll see movement back and forth, but we're going to try to keep the hearing moving. So let's turn first to Vice Chairwoman Harris with your testimony, please.
Chairman Murkowski, Vice Chairman Schatz, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony. I am Sarah Harris, Vice Chairwoman of the Mohegan Tribe. I'm here today in my capacity as the Secretary of United South and Eastern Tribes Sovereignty Protection Fund. This hearing is timely as Indian country is facing the impacts of what is on track to be the longest government shutdown in history. And while we have experienced lengthy shutdowns in the past, including the 2018 through 2019 shutdown, we must also contend with the upheaval that the current administration's policies are bringing to the functioning and composition of the federal government, many of which appear to be implemented without regard to programs, services, funding, and contracts that tribal nations and our people are owed. These changes, including reductions in force, are exacerbating the negative impacts of this shutdown for Indian nations, citizens, and communities. It is critically important to underscore that allowing shutdowns caused by partisan disagreement to impact the delivery of trust and treaty obligations is unacceptable. Although we celebrate the certainty that advance appropriations have brought to IHS at this time, tribal nations access funding and services throughout the federal government, the vast majority of which remains unprotected. Our tribal nations are working to ensure that citizens have continued access to food as nutrition programs like SNAP and WIC are running out of funds. For example, USET's SPF's board president, Penobscot Chief Kirk Francis, was unable to testify today because he is currently working with his tribal council to reallocate over $200,000 in other funding to bridge the gap in nutrition and funding for November alone. This includes asking tribal hunters to donate moose meat so that elders can be fed. As the temperature continues to drop this fall, at least 12 of our member nations are without low-income heating assistance through the Department of Health and Human Services. The CDC is extremely delayed in sharing disease prevalence data with our Tribal Epidemiology Center as South Carolina faces a measles outbreak and we enter flu season. Finally, some tribal nations are being forced to consider taking out lines of credit to continue providing services to their citizens and communities. Congress and the administration must work together to ensure the shutdown is lifted as soon as possible. The longer the shutdown continues, the greater the likelihood of compounding impacts to essential services in Indian country, those that are the responsibility of the federal government. We urge the administration to work with Indian country to ensure its policies, including RIFs, do not affect the delivery of trust and treaty obligations. Beginning on January 20th, as we do with every administration, tribal nations have approached the White House, the Office of Management and Budget, and numerous federal agencies and departments seeking partnership and to educate them on the unique legal and moral obligations the United States holds to Indian nations. Tribal nations, citizens, and communities. We've explained why these obligations supersede the administration's priorities related to the scope and size of the federal government. This includes requests for exemptions from the administration's RIFs for tribal serving positions, both through the Department of Government Efficiency and now through OMB. Despite this advocacy, many tribal serving positions have been eliminated over the course of this year. Tribal organizations have also come together in response to the early actions of the administration, including USET, SPF, and our sister organizations here today. Currently, a total of 37 member organizations, the Coalition of Tribal Sovereignty, is a nonpartisan collaboration of local, regional, and national tribal organizations working together to safeguard tribal sovereignty and uphold the United States delivery of trust and treaty obligations. Since February, the coalition has sent over 50 letters to the executive branch. Broadly, these communications offer the following messages. Indian country is being unintentionally swept into the administration's broad implementations of its policy priorities. Because of trust and treaty obligations, tribal programs are not like other federal programs and must be treated differently. Tribal nations in the Trump administration have important overlapping goals, and we must focus our energies on pursuing those goals together. At present, however, our focus is being drawn to protecting Indian country from collateral harm caused by imprecise implementation of the Trump administration's priorities. It is critical that all branches of the federal government recognize that IHS, BIA, and BIE are not the sole agencies charged with delivering trust and treaty obligations. Tribal nations access funding and services throughout the federal government for which we have prepaid with our lands, resources, and the lives of our ancestors. It's simply not enough to only protect these agencies from the impacts of policy changes and position eliminations. All tribal slavery personnel, programs, and agencies must be exempt from these actions. Turning our attention back to this committee and Congress more broadly, the shutdown and this year's federal upheaval should inspire you to think differently about how trust and treaty obligations are funded and carried out. In the short term, all federal Indian funding must be protected from shutdowns and continuing resolutions through advance appropriations. This would ensure that the federal government continues to meet its obligations regardless of politics and provide some certainty to our people, patients, and employees each year. In the long term, full and mandatory funding would better exemplify the obligations of the United States to tribal nations. In closing, we urge this Congress to bring the destabilizing effects of its own inaction to an end for Indian country. We thank the committee for the opportunity to testify and look forward to partnering as you seek to advance and improve the delivery of trust and treaty obligations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vice Chairman. Next, we turn to Mr. Mallot. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator, and Vice Chair Schatz, members of the committee. Thank you for having this hearing today. It's really critical and timely for our tribal communities. My name is Ben Mallot, as Senator Murkowski mentioned. I honor serving as president of AFN. AFN is Alaska's largest statewide organization. Its membership includes 170 federally recognized tribes, 154 RIFs corporations, 11 RIFs corporations, 11 regional nonprofits, over 160,000 Alaskan natives. As I went through working on my testimony for today, I reached out to a lot of our member organizations. And I'm lucky to hear that most of our tribal organizations and communities prepared for the shutdown. But as we approached 30 days of the shutdown, many of them did not prepare for that long of a shutdown. As you mentioned, we're at day 29. A prolonged shutdown in Alaska becomes life-threatening for many of our communities. Also delays the ability for our tribes, who are very capacity-strained, to do reporting and or to also work on additional permits and grants. It's just critical for Alaska, as many of our construction season is summer. Right now is when our tribes have to get the orders in for doing infrastructure and critical supplies for our communities. Also, while many of our tribes and organizations plan for a shutdown, we cannot always plan for weather. As Senator Murkowski mentioned, on October 12th, we had a very serious typhoon hit Alaska. It was like no other typhoon hit Alaska in our history, and over thousands of Alaska natives were evacuated to Anchorage. I want to thank the work of the federal government and state of Alaska, and also our delegation, your team, Senator Murkowski, for responding to the storm. It's really critical that we have these employees responding. It's also critical that they also get paid for their work in responding to save our communities. And I recognize that. I want to thank many of the federal employees who are working right now in response to the storm who are not getting paid right now. I also want to recognize that during this storm, Advanced IHS allowed organizations such as YKHC to respond immediately to this storm. I want to thank and also highlight, as members of this panel is how important Advanced IHS is for our communities. Also, as we go into impact shutdowns, I cannot highlight enough just how food security is critical for this right now. As SNAP about to end on Friday, we are looking at the ability for our communities to decide between heating and fuel. For example, right now in Kotzebue, Alaska, a gallon of milk is $12.99. A 24 count of eggs is $13.19. A 4-pack of bathroom tissue, this is single ply, is $8. A loaf of bread is over $6. Stove oil is $7.79. 6 cans of corn hash beef is $39.99. Without SNAP and without LIHEAP, it's critical for communities to decide between heating and fuel. Right now, I looked up the weather in Uktiavik is 3 degrees, but it feels like -9. In Bethel is 17 degrees. In Kotzebue is 15 degrees. In my mom's home village of Rampart is 21 degrees with light snow. My father's hometown of Yaktat, which is a lot farther south, is a balmy 35 degrees. We're right now in November, or almost November, it's going to get colder. Without LIHEAP, without SNAP, our communities or tribal citizens will have to decide between fuel and food. In Anvik, 65% of the revenue from that store comes from SNAP. In Yaktat, about $2,000 a week comes from SNAP. In these communities such as Anvik and Yaktat, the village store is often the most stable jobs in the community. It's critical for this to happen. LIHEAP is also critical for our communities. As I mentioned, especially for our elders, they're going to decide between heat and fuel. In some of our communities, elders are there alone and might not have family to help them with food security. Also during this time, with the government shutdown, also lack of consultations, more specifically around the Federal Subsistence Board, which is unable to meet right now. During the pandemic, the Federal Subsistence Board was able to open up emergency hunts to allow communities and tribal organizations, tribes to open up and get moose for food security during the pandemic. During this shutdown, they cannot meet. Also delays the ability for regional advisory committees to meet and also to have no local voice in food security at this time. What this does also impacts our progress, as Alaska is a very large state with very difficult travel. To reschedule a meeting for FSB or reschedule a RAC meeting takes a lot of coordination and could put these meetings back months. Down to 15 seconds. I'm going to close right now, but right now the impact is still uncertain for many of the communities. The RIFs, we don't know what would happen until the government reopens. When that happens, we do not know. Right now, the burden of many of our local communities is actually on the shoulders of our tribes and local ANCs. We don't know the impact until the government reopens, and we're worried that as the government reopens, might be delays in getting funds necessary to our communities in a timely manner. With this said, as members of this panel will say, we urge the community to be innovative, look at how we reopen government and support our tribal communities. With that said, I'm going to close again. Koyana Gunakshish for this hearing today, and thank you for leadership, Senator Murkowski.
Gunakshish, Ben. Mr. Byrd, welcome.
Thank you, Senator Murkowski. Good afternoon. My name is Kerry Byrd. I'm the president of the National Indian Education Association. I'm a citizen of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate of South Dakota and a descendant of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. On behalf of the NIA, the students, educators, and tribal nations we serve, I'm here today to share the distressing situation facing our Native youth, a situation which intensifies each day the shutdown continues. Across the country, the shutdown and reductions in force have crept into our classrooms, our early childhood programs, and our homes. What began as a budget dispute in Washington has become a daily crisis in Indian country. When our ancestors signed treaties with the United States, they did so in exchange for certain guarantees. One of these was that our children and our children's children would be educated. This obligation is not a discretionary choice, it is a payment on a debt owed. These promises are what every Native parent holds onto when they send their child to school each morning. It's what keeps a principal in Shiprock, New Mexico, and a Head Start worker in Sisseton, South Dakota showing up, even when the federal government is not. At the Department of Education, the Office of Impact Aid, which provides $1.6 billion annually to federally impacted school districts, has come to a standstill. With the staff furloughed for over a month and no forward funding, essential payments have not arrived. In South Dakota, Montana, and New Mexico, school districts are burning through reserves just to meet payroll. For some schools, these dollars make up to 50% of the budgets which keep them open. The situation is just as severe at the Administration for Children and Families. Beginning on November 1st, 12 American Indian Alaska Native Head Start grantees serving over 2,500 children will face an immediate funding shortfall. The Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma has already prepared to step in to keep their centers open, but smaller tribes across the country may not have the reserves. They are being forced to decide between keeping their early childhood classrooms open or feeding their communities, as SNAP and nutrition programs also face funding gaps. This is not a choice tribal nations should ever have to make. These impacts show the fragility of the system. Programs that were designed to uphold the federal government's moral and legal promises are now being held hostage. Thankfully, while other agencies have gone dark, BIE offices and schools have stayed open, not because the system is immune to the shutdown, but because the government understands that federal employees within the BIE are unique and must be protected. The administration has designated all BIE staff as accepted or exempted. Teachers are still in classrooms, bus drivers are still on the routes, dormitory staff still are caring for killed students far from home. That is how it should be, and how it would always be if the entire system were to receive advance appropriations. Meanwhile, Native students outside of BIE schools are at unique risk. More than 90% of Native children attend public schools, many in rural or reservation-adjacent districts, which depend on federal programs such as Title VI, Impact Aid, and Johnson O'Malley. Yet, like Impact Aid, JOM is not forward funded. During a shutdown, payments to tribal contractors and Indian parent committees are frozen. That means tutoring stops, after-school support is canceled, while communities wait for Washington to act. For many Native families, JOM is one of the only visible signs that the federal government remembers its educational promise to their children. The Indian Program's Advanced Appropriations Act would fix this by ensuring all BIE accounts, not just school operations, are fully insulated from shutdowns. This committee's leadership, combined with the support of appropriators, has already shown how this approach works by protecting IHS. This committee is critical to making that happen for the rest of our programs. We urge this committee to educate your peers and protect tribal serving offices and accounts from any future attempts to play politics with the federal government's solemn obligations. At the Department of Education, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education has been hollowed out. According to court filings earlier this month, more than 130 positions have been eliminated on top of staff reduction in the spring. Of the 282 employees who staffed the office just a year ago, fewer than 100 remain. 29 days ago, the entire Office of Indian Education was furloughed. As of 15 minutes ago, we have official confirmation that 7 of 9 staff in the same office have been terminated. That means no one to process grants, approve budgets, or support tribal education departments and Indian parent committees. If these terminations are allowed to go into full effect, Indian education programs as we know them would be functionally eliminated. But it's not OIE alone that is at risk. The Office of Impact Aid, which supports 537 Indian land school districts alongside millions of military-connected students, has been almost entirely laid off. The United States trust obligations cannot be fulfilled if the federal staff responsible for carrying out it no longer exist. If these workforce reductions continue and if shutdowns are allowed to repeatedly disrupt the flow of education funding, the United States will be in direct violation of its trust and treaty obligations. Education is a promise to our people as part of the guarantees this nation made. It cannot be withheld because of political stalemates or administrative restructuring. Today, I ask you to keep that promise. I ask Congress to reopen the government. I ask you to work with the administration to rescind the RIFs that target tribal serving staff and to make sure that Native children will never again be caught in the crossfire of political shutdown. Thank you for your attention to this urgent matter and for your continued commitment to upholding the promises made to tribal nations and Native students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. Mr. Upton, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Murkowski and Vice Chair Schatz and the committee for this opportunity to share today. My name is Pete Upton. I'm an enrolled member of the Ponca Tribe of Nebraska. I serve as the CEO for the Native CDFI Network, the only national membership organization dedicated to supporting Native community development financial institutions. I also serve as the Executive Director of Native 360 Loan Fund, a Native certified CDFI serving Native people in Nebraska, South Dakota, Kansas, and Iowa. On behalf of NCN and the nearly 100 certified and emerging Native CDFIs we serve, I express our grave concern regarding the reduction in force action on October 10th to terminate all CDFI fund staff and abolish the CDFI fund altogether. These actions will economically devastate tribal communities. According to a recent Federal Reserve study, 46% of tribal communities are located in banking deserts. Native CDFIs are typically the only financial institutions serving these communities, providing access to capital, credit, and financial education where no alternative exists. Abolishing the fund will cause severe, immediate, and long-term harm to Native CDFI's ability to serve the growing small business, homeownership, agriculture, consumer lending, needs of tribal communities, the needs long ignored by mainstream banking institutions. We are already experiencing the impacts. The FY25 appropriated funds for the Native American CDFI Assistance Program remain frozen, with no Treasury staff at work to finalize these agreements or release the awards, choking off critical seed capital for the Native CDFIs whose average asset size is just $5.8 million. Meanwhile, dozens of Native CDFIs awaiting Treasury recertification remain in limbo with no one to process their applications. The RIF and the looming abolishment of the fund also spell a demise for New Market Tax Credits program, a key financing tool that cultivate private investments in vital economic and community development projects on tribal lands. Without the fund, staff to administer it, the latest double round of new market tax credits won't be allocated to Native community development entities or other CDEs serving Indian country. Also in danger is Congress's push to expand and make permanent the successful USDA 502 relending program, which will enhance the Native CDFI's proven ability to foster home ownership among Native people by issuing them mortgage loans on tribal lands. Last and perhaps most troubling, abolishing the fund will end the federal process of certifying CDFIs, the official stamp of approval Native CDFIs use to secure investments from non-federal sources. This will dramatically reduce the flow of capital for farm, ranch, and other business development, housing, home ownership, community infrastructure projects when Indian country's need for such capital increases substantially with each passing year. In the CDFI fund's own words, Native CDFIs are helping transform their communities. They're creating businesses and jobs in places that desperately need them. They are providing personal financial education and business training to persons who have been excluded from our nation's economic mainstream. They are helping to change the lives of the people they serve. The United States fulfills its trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations in part by providing funding to Native organizations like CDFIs that directly serve tribal nations and their citizens. The CDFI fund and the NACA program are not handouts. They are a practical fulfillment of those trust and treaty obligations, ensuring Native people have the same access to financial, economic opportunities as all other Americans. We thank and commend the 105 GOP members of Congress who sent a letter to the administration last week in support of CDFIs in the fund, a resounding testament to the fact that CDFIs are not a partisan issue. They deserve the continued support of the federal government so they can continue their vital work, which can only happen if the administration's RIF action and its plan to abolish the CDFI fund are abolished. We stand ready to partner with you to achieve this goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Upton. And we will finally hear from Mr. Locklear. Welcome.
Chairwoman Mikowski, Vice Chairman Schatz, and members of the committee, on behalf of NIHB and the 574 federally recognized tribal nations we serve, thank you for this opportunity to testify. My name is A.C. Locklear. I am a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina and serve as a Chief Executive Officer for the National Indian Health Board, the only national tribally led organization dedicated to advancing the health of all tribal nations. For more than 50 years, NIHB has worked to ensure that the United States meets its trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations, obligations affirmed in law that do not stop during government shutdowns. While IHS plays a central role, the duty to provide for the health and well-being of American Indians and Alaska Natives extends across all of HHS. According to OMB's 2024 Native American Funding Crosscut, HHS administers over $12 billion in Native-related funding. Yet HHS still lacks comprehensive department-wide crosscut on how these dollars and others reach tribal communities. Without it, it is difficult to show how RIFs and the shutdown disrupt services. Every day, the ITU system, including federal, tribal, and urban programs, relies on federal appropriations to pay staff, keep clinics open, and provide life-saving care. When that funding stops, even briefly, the impact is immediate and severe. Before advance appropriations, IHS was the only federal healthcare agency without funding during shutdowns. Clinics reduced critical services, providers went unpaid, and tribes relied on emergency funds, even facing credit downgrades and real-world impacts. In one tribal community, the inability to sustain operations led to the loss of 10 community members' lives. Thanks to congressional action and this committee's leadership, IHS continues full operations during this shutdown. No closures, no furloughs, no missed payments. When severe storms struck western Alaska earlier this month, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Health Corporation responded immediately because it was funded. That's what stability looks like in action. But gaps remain. Roughly $1.3 billion across 6 IHS accounts are not covered by advance appropriations. For now, IHS is covering those costs while also ensuring that commissioned Corps officers in tribal facilities continue to receive pay. But that stopgap is unsustainable. Similarly, the The Special Diabetes Program for Indians is also affected. As the nation's most effective initiative for combating diabetes in Indian country, SDPI is responsible for an 84% drop in uncontrolled diabetes-related hospitalizations, and estimates show it saved IHS between $174 and $520 million in healthcare costs. SDPI has had only minimal increases in recent years and lacks stable multi-year funding. This shutdown puts the program in jeopardy, forcing IHS to rely on unobligated balances to keep it running. NIHB strongly supports the permanent reauthorization of SDPI and no less than $20 million annually with automatic funding increases. Programs like SDPI prove that predictable and advanced funding improves program outcomes, extends lives, and upholds a federal trust responsibility. Advance appropriations works. Now every tribal health program must be protected so tribes never face a lapse in care. Additionally, workforce reductions are eroding capacity across HHS. We're grateful that Secretary Kennedy is protecting IHS and tribal affairs staff from the deepest cuts. Still, IHS and other health program staff are not fully exempt from hiring freezes and workforce impacts. The Voluntary Early Retirement Authority saw IHS lose over 1,000 employees through retirement attrition. Since then, over 500 positions have been filled, while the agency faces the lowest offer acceptance rate in its history and a 30% overall vacancy rate. 43% of IHS facilities are so thinly staffed that losing just one physician could force closure. These losses translate into preventable deaths in tribal communities. Across the rest of HHS, RIFs and hiring freezes has further reduced workforce that tribes rely on for grant management and critical technical assistance. At the Community Administration for Community Living, regional administrators who once served as direct points of contact for tribes were eliminated earlier this year, leaving tribal programs navigating this complex system on their own. Shutdowns and RIFs are not just fiscal events. They directly weaken the government's capacity to meet its trust and treaty obligations. As Native communities confront the nation's most severe health disparities, we need to strengthen, not weaken, the federal health infrastructure that underpins tribal self-determination and the well-being of our people. We must extend protections to all IHS accounts, rebuild the workforce, permanently reauthorize SDPI, and improve coordination across HHS through a true cross-cut of tribal health funding. Our sovereignty does not shut down. The federal trust responsibility cannot be reduced in force. Thank you, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, and thanks to all of the testifiers. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Mr. Locklear, let me start with you. As we know, November 1st, funds for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, will run out. For my tribe in Duck Valley, the loss of SNAP funding means that 200 families, or 50 to 60% of their tribe, would lose access to essential food support. In response, the tribe is preparing to rely on traditional practices, such as hunting elk to feed their members. It's important to highlight how serious of an issue this will become. This Saturday, tribes all across our country will lose access to essential food services. Mr. Locklear, can you specify what actions or emergency measures is the Indian Health Board planning to take to address the health impacts of the loss of SNAP support for our tribal communities?
Sure, absolutely. So we are working with our partners across Indian country, including the Coalition for Tribal Sovereignty, to ensure that we are providing the most resources for tribes to understand what their options are during this time. There are tribes who are, as we mentioned earlier, who have already issued state of emergencies, who are going to really access their own funding. But ultimately, tribes are going to have to tap into their funding to provide for their resources for their people. That's funding that may run out that they have on reserves.
So can I ask you, when you're talking, let's talk specifically Duck Valley. If they were to reach out to you, what would you tell them? Where they could go for assistance?
I would probably coordinate. So in the National Indian Health Board, we work with our partners who work with SNAP. We don't directly work with SNAP at the National Indian Health Board, but we do support those who do. We ultimately will help any issues that come out of it related to health in any way that we can.
And are you, is that something you obviously normally do, but are you putting additional staff dedicated to addressing this during this period?
That's a wonderful question. Unfortunately, due to funding restraints and also that most of the national organizations such as NIHB, nonprofits, rely heavily on federal funding to help support a lot of their programs, which are also being restricted at this time. And
Outside of
also
the government shutdown, that restriction has occurred. Limitations to funding,
limitations of funding
to staff.
have consistently occurred. So we are looking at other partners, philanthropy, to help booster that. But we are putting our own resources, our own reserves to make sure that we are supporting Indian country in this moment the best that we can.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Upton, in Indian country where access to home ownership is already limited, the community development financial institutions have been a critical resource in helping our tribal families access financing, especially after natural disasters. Can you talk a little bit about, with the proposed elimination of the CDFI fund, how do you see this impacting the ability of tribal communities to make long-term housing decisions and recover from natural disasters?
There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you for that question. You know, the elimination of the CDFI fund would be detrimental to all the hard work, especially getting the USDA 502 relending program, the momentum going for that, because that program there proved to support two native CDFIs in 2019 did more home loans in 1 year than the USDA did in 10 years.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is native CDFIs were in our communities, we know our communities, and we're there working every day in our communities to get homeowners into a home. And the elimination of these funds, the way that we capital stack anymore and the way that we bring deals together, it's native communities helping native communities. And I can see we've had the biggest struggle in getting low interest, long-term capital. And finally, with the USDA 502 relending program, it's finally in sight that we could do that. It's a $50 million, potentially $50 million annual allotment for housing. And it would put us back 10, 15 years of all the hard work that our native CDFIs have done. And if the fund is eliminated, our work would stop, and we're going to have to find another avenue. But the CDFI fund itself, it's a stamp for investors to say that you are investable. So we bring in private capital at a rate 8-to-1. So to answer your question, it would be devastating for our tribal communities. And right now, native CDFIs are playing a big, big part of it and bringing other partners in on a daily basis to supply housing for our tribal communities.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Smith.
Well, thank you so much, Vice Chair Schatz, and thanks to all of you for being here today. This is such a useful opportunity for us to hear about what's happening, the real-life impacts as we struggle through this administration and this shutdown. And I'm really glad to see Mr. Upton here. You have been such a great friend and advocate, and to help my office in many ways as we've done all of the work on CDFIs and native CDFIs. And so maybe I just want to start by following up a bit on Senator Cortez Masto's questions, because I'm trying to get at what are kind of the actual on-the-ground impacts of the way in which kind of the mass firing of the CDFI fund staff at Treasury, like what impact that's really having. And in your testimony, you write about how none of the 3 largest home lenders in the U.S. issue federally guaranteed mortgages for the construction of new permanent homes on tribal land, so like 0. I mean, this is where CDFIs have played such an integral role, as you said, because you know your communities. Is there? I just want to pause on that for a minute, see if there's any additional information you think would be useful for the committee to understand when we think about that, kind of financial desert on tribal lands when it comes to home mortgages without CDFIs.
Without CDFIs, the greatest challenge that we have is being able to bring in, and I spoke with CDFIs up in Alaska yesterday, and it's an ecosystem that we have, and it's bringing in all the federal programs to support the capital needs to home mortgages. And whether it be new market tax credits, the USDA, there's a number of leveraging tools that we use to fulfill our long-term capital needs. But I think more than anything, the shutdown currently, what it's doing, when you think about this, you know, the CDFI fund itself, there's about $6 billion of funding that they roll out annually. And I just ran the numbers through a couple of colleagues. There's about 81 employees currently at the CDFI fund before the RIF. And with that $6 billion, you know, they administer and the policy of, and they review the applications, the award process, the compliance, the monitoring, the data analysis, the reporting, the cross-agency coordination, but more than anything, they oversee the certification.
Right.
So there's so much that those staff members do that's not happening right now. And without the 2025 awards that should be rolled out as we speak here, the TA awards were announced, but there's no one to process those awards. And more than anything, it is causing, maybe, I wouldn't say a lot of fear, but it's that golden stamp that philanthropy sees that you're a certified native CDFI and you are investable.
You have
so
to.
maybe there might be some treading back a little bit. It's going to slow the process down if we don't get the staff reversed and get them back to work.
Get those RIFT people back on the ground, right, exactly. Well, there's so much to talk about here. I appreciate very much you being here. I want to turn to Ms. Harris. Thank you so much for being here. And though I was not here for opening statements, I understand that you spoke about how the president of USDT is not able to be here because they're busy trying to figure out how to cover the gaps, the huge gaps that are being left in the nutrition program because of this looming refusal by the president to spend money that he's authorized to spend to pay for SNAP programs. And of course, tribal lands have this kind of, you have this nutrition assistance, which is extremely important, SNAP, but then you also have the FDIPR program, which is really important. And I'm hearing from Minnesota tribes that there's like kind of switching happening right now as people are trying to figure out where is the best place to be able to get stable sources of nutrition assistance for folks on tribal lands. And people are in the midst of sort of trying to figure out how to change their benefits. And all of this on top of all of these massive cuts to SNAP that happened in the one big beautiful bill, so-called. So I'd love to just hear you comment on this and say a bit more about what you're hearing from members of the communities that you represent.
Certainly. I think that one of the things that has been incredibly challenging for tribes during shutdown and with the RIFs is just the complete lack of transparency.
Yes,
as
exactly.
well.
You don't know what to do, where to go.
No one knows what to do or what's going on, and they can't also get in touch with any of their agency, partners at this point in time. So everyone is just sort of flying in the dark and trying to do the best that they can at this moment in time. But I think it's also important to recognize, too, that tribal nations, we already face long-standing and continuing challenges with providing access to healthy and nutritious food for our citizens. And the challenges contribute to health and educational and overall wellness disparities across all of our tribal communities. Yep. And the current situation with SNAP and WIC only further exacerbates the situation. And we must further subsidize to provide for the failure of our federal partners to meet their trust and treaty obligations. Yeah. I mean, tribal nations are my own tribal nation is having to monetarily subsidize for, the WIC and SNAP benefits that some of our citizens are not providing. And given the emergent nature of all of this crisis, tribes are scrambling, and so they're spending their own time and resources, to provide the most basic of human needs, food, for their citizens.
I know that I'm out of time, and so I'm so sorry to cut you off, but I want to respect the chair and vice chair, but I just want to, I really want to put a point on what you said about how the federal government has a trust and treaty responsibility to provide nutrition assistance, housing, other fundamental basics as part of the treaties that we signed. This is not a nice to, is not a may, it is a shall.
Yes.
And that is the difference here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Thank you all for your testimony that you have shared. I think particularly as we're going into the winter in Alaska, and I know that in many parts of Indian country, it's very real up in Minnesota. Maybe not so much in Hawaii or Nevada, but the concerns about food versus fuel that you have referenced, Mr. Mallot, I think that they are very real when we talk about food insecurity. And we have heard and seen the pictures of the loss from the typhoon Halong, and you see devastation within the village. But the part of it that is really heartrending is when you see freezers that had been stocked with subsistence foods, the seal, the berries, all that had been gathered that would take these families through the winter, that now is lost because there's no power in these villages. And so their food source for the winter is gone. And then the reliance on SNAP, as you have pointed out in so many of these communities. So this is a point that for many in Alaska is tangibly real and tangibly frightening. And so everything that we can do to make sure that that SNAP and WIC funding is able to proceed, I think has got to be a priority for us. I appreciate the comment that you made, Vice Chairman Harris, in recognizing that it's not just IHS, BIE, BIA that are tribal programs that we need to focus on, that this is where the trust and treaty responsibility is. It is through so many tribal serving programs, and that's what we're talking about here across so many of these accounts, and how our Native people are impacted. I think it's somewhat timely. Apparently, there's an analysis that has been released by the Brookings Institute about how they call structural flaws in how the federal government finances its obligations to Native nations, Native American people, and actually suggesting that this might, the impact of the shutdown and the real world consequences on what it means for food, for fuel, for access to financing, for health care, for education, that maybe this is that moment for reform. So rather than kind of reverting to business as usual, you kind of reevaluate how the federal government is meeting its funding obligations to our tribes and Native citizens. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Byrd, because your comment about the impact of the RIFs on Office of Indian Education, you said that 7 of 9 have been terminated as of today. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So 7 or 9 are terminated. We've got, we have the office, we have the director of the office in place, right?
Correct.
And then this is an office that administers millions of dollars in formula and discretionary grants. I'm told that last month 28 grants were awarded from the office for Alaska Native education. So effectively, you've got nobody at home to award these grants, administer these grants. Is that a fair summation of where we are right now?
Yes, that's pretty fair. They basically have no contact within the office to handle their drawdowns for their funds, to relay technical assistance, to help with their data collection that they need to process with their school districts. So really they have basically no help in the DC office with the Office of Indian Education. And it's so important for the students to get the academic support, tutoring, assistance for the Indian parent committees. So the lack of the resources in DC, in the Office of Indian Education, is lacking. And so that really leaves the communities really struggling in their school districts to understand what's happening.
And then you also touched on Tribal Head Start. And I'm hearing from grantees in my state that are concerned about the impact effective November 1 in terms of these grantees, but also not being able to access technical assistance. There's a stop work order that was received. What does that, what impact will that have on our tribal Head Starts if there's nobody, again, there to help with technical assistance?
Well, in some communities, obviously, they have to prepare for their next round or request for funding, and so they don't really have the information in place to provide for their auditing purposes as far as getting ready to submit their next level of funding sources. So they're basically caught with behind the eight ball, basically, because they need the assistance up front before they even apply for their next round of funding.
Mr. Upton, I want to turn to you about CDFIs and the certifications by Treasury. You basically said that there's no Treasury staff to process these certifications. And so if you can't process them, okay, tell me what happens. Tell me what happens in terms of the inability of Treasury to move forward with any certifications when we're talking about access to capital markets.
Without certification, it really gives, certification gives investors, philanthropy partners, federal agencies confidence that the funds they deploy to us, whether it be through a form of a grant, it's that golden stamp that we're going to deploy that money with integrity, accountability, and measurable impact.
So you're saying it's a stamp of approval. So if you don't have the stamp, does that mean that you're less likely to be able to access that loan?
You're going to be less likely to have philanthropy. Philanthropy already, Native-led organizations are less than 2% of total philanthropy giving. And with the Native CDFIs especially, it's so important that we have that certification because without it, I fear that philanthropy isn't going to be as giving and as open to. There's no guarantee. It's the certification. It's the golden stamp that you are what you say you are. And the CDFI fund has certified that all of your accountability, you're doing what you said you were going to do with the money that they gave you. And that's probably the most important when it comes to bringing on private investors and private capital to the work that we do, is that it builds the trust, it builds a trusting relationship with our funders. So without it, there's many programs that you are required to have that CDFI certification to even apply. And I know there's a lot of investments through, whether it be a investment from a bank, also they're going to require some sort of certification. So I think that is my fear, that those types of investments will disappear, and they'll disappear quickly.
Turn to Vice Chair Schatz.
Thank you, Chair Murkowski. Secretary Harris, thanks for being here. We've seen tribes furlough some of their own staff and have to keep and take loans out. Can you just drill down for me on some of the scenarios that certain tribes are going through with this lack of funding? Just tell us what's happening.
Well, we're hearing from different member tribes of USET, and I know one of the things that we've heard anecdotally that tribes are looking at is securing lines of credit. Because right now there were, grants that they anticipated would be coming, but there's no information about whether or not they will be coming or not. And when, we're taking out lines of credit, we're also, incurring interest payments on those lines of credit. And then that later, pulls tribal funding away from things that could be going to programs. And then at the end of the day, there's no guarantee that those will even come through. My own tribe is having to supplement SNAP assistance, and also, our daycare facility is due to have a grant. We just recently opened that, and now we're having to supplement that and, pay for the daycare facility on our own. I know that many of our tribal members are setting up, food banks and trying to work with, state and local governments in order to supplement that. Others, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, are trying to supplement with their own, hunting and, traditional foods. And I think overall, the biggest thing is just that there's no transparency, there's no end in sight, and there's no information. I mean, tribal governments are resilient and resourceful, and we are problem solvers, but it's difficult to know what you're even solving for, if it's short term or if it's long term. And so I think everyone right now is just, dealing with what's in front of them and trying to find stopgap measures to provide for our tribal citizens until, there's more clarity. And just, I guess at this point, starting to anticipate that this may be a lot longer, and that will require more thinking and more, measures on how to deal with that.
And how much, you may not be able to answer this question because I'm not sure any of us quite know, but it seems to me there are at least two things going on, right? There's the expiration of the appropriations bill, and that has pretty direct impacts on tribes. But then there's also these RIFs that are not really required under the Anti-Deficiency Act. So can you figure out what's causing what?
I mean, the RIFs, I know I can speak from my own experience, the RIFs are causing us to not be able to even know in some cases. I mean, we don't know if the person is furloughed, or we don't know if the person has been permanently let go. I mean, historically speaking, I can say that I worked during the Obama administration as the chief of staff for Indian Affairs. And at that point in time, and I checked this today, we had around 8,000 employees when we went through the 2013 shutdown. And currently there's about 6,000 employees as identified in the September 2025 contingency planning. And even at that point in time, I mean, we were struggling to meet the need. And, the fact is that RIFs violate the trust and treaty obligations, and no one's arguing that Indian Affairs or the BIA were ever overstaffed or overfunded, and no one argues that other federal agencies don't have the same trust and treaty obligations as the BIA and BIE. It's the opposite. So, and Congress has, again and again on a bipartisan basis, sought to ameliorate this inequality, but the RIFs are basically taking a hatchet to the progress that we've made in the delivery of trust obligations, and it's really, taking the authority of Congress away to provide for the trust and treaty obligations. But I think it's really, in essence, it's just a lack of information about what is actually going on, who is actually still at the department, if this is a temporary shutdown thing, or if it's going to be a permanent RIF situation. And I think it's just leaving our members confused and without the ability to even properly confront the problem that's in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously we have some policy disagreements, obviously related to the shutdown and even related to Indian country, but I think it is at least fair if this administration is going to sort of execute a sort of rolling series of RIFs, and because of my relationship with the chair, I'm trying to avoid any sort of partisan vibe here. But it is at least fair to try to figure out what is related to the shutdown and what is not, because I'm quite worried that we could end up on the other side of this shutdown and in a short-term continuing resolution while we work on the rest of the appropriations process. And then we find that, it turns out 2/3 of the problems were just a lack of human beings to push out grants, to communicate with tribes and tribal leaders, and programs that serve Native people across the country. So I actually think we, as a committee, need to sort out, to the extent that it's possible, what is what. And I understand that in the politics of it all, it's part of a piece, right? It's a point that one party is trying to make to the other, and then the other party, and then it's just partisan warfare. But you need to know, if this thing is over at some point next month, are your problems over, or are you still suffering through 30% of it, 90% of it, 2% of it. And the fact that we don't know the answer to that we don't know and you don't know, I think is a problem. We need to at least ground ourselves in the same set of facts.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Senator Schatz. I would agree. I think we need that kind of information. I don't remember how early it was in this session, but we had a hearing here in Indian Affairs to look at the impact of some of the reductions in force, what the layoffs, the impact of the layoffs were having on again, so many of these tribal serving programs where we had the Secretary of HHS say very clearly, I'm going to hold IHS harmless in this, and when it came to those layoffs, we saw that. But I think it was important for the administration to see it's not just in, again, IHS, BIA, BIE. It is in so many of these other programs where, again, tribal citizens are being served. So understanding the implications of all of this is kind of part of where we are today. I just want to ask a couple really quick follow-ons. And Mr. Mallot, this one is directed to you. I was asked earlier in the hallway by a reporter about LIHEAP because they know for us in the north and those in the east this time of year, LIHEAP is important to our colder weather places. And I was asked, do I have any idea how long LIHEAP funds are going to be available? And I'm told that there was supposed to be a new round of funding supposed to go out to the states and the tribes by the 1st of November. That's apparently not going to happen. Some tribes may have leftover funds. Are you hearing from folks back home about LIHEAP?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. In my oral remarks, also forgot to thank you for sponsoring Senate Bill 3024 Keep SNAP Funded Act, so thank you for that. Regarding LIHEAP, I was able to talk to Jackie Pata this morning, who's one of our Clean Haida, and she managed LEAP for Southeast. You're right that the funding that hits November 1st might not happen. Right now, SNAP LIHEAP is administered by a lot of tribes or tribal organizations in each region of Alaska. They usually start with elders first, so I believe they're taking applications right now in the hopes that the government will open in time. If November 1 doesn't hit, they don't have any funds to give out that assistance. And then with the combination SNAP, it's going to, especially our elders who are first in line for LIHEAP,
Right.
it's going to have them probably figuring out between medication, food, or heat for their homes. As I went through and figured and got comments from the communities, a lot of our rural Alaska communities don't have local food banks. It's up to the tribe that does that services, and LIHEAP's a big one of that. So for our elders especially, they might have an application in. There's no guarantee when they'll get that funding. So again, it's going to be a crunch as we hit November with the combination SNAP and LIHEAP. With that said, too, we also know about the RIFs or furloughs, right? If the government opens next week, how long would it get them the money out? And any delays is going to further exacerbate the system, the process.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much uncertainty that is at play here. We can't figure out the path forward right now on our spending bills, although I am a little bit more optimistic on that today. But it just seems that there's more and more concerns that are coming up with whether it's the general funds of the smaller tribes talking about, we don't have very much left in our available funds here. The potential that some of our tribal employers are going to have to start working without pay or being laid off. Challenges that come with paying banks when 105L and contract support costs payments aren't coming in. So there's all of this that is at play that is just so challenging, so difficult, so worrisome, and in my view, so unnecessary. There's no good reason for a shutdown ever, and yet we are in the midst of the second longest, and I have no desire in wanting to beat the goal of the longest government shutdown. So my hope is that not only will we get the government open quickly, we will get a move on with our appropriations bills that need to be resolved now, but also going forward a more certain process. And again, I think given the comments that we've heard from the vice chair and what I said earlier about maybe looking at this as a moment for critical review about how we, the federal government, meet the trust responsibilities and obligations to our tribes, to American Indians, Alaska Natives, and Native Hawaiians. This might be the kick in the fanny that we need to look a little more critically at that. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making the effort to be here today. Thank you for your testimony. For those who would ask for follow-up questions, for the record, we're going to hold it open for a couple weeks now. But again, thank you for being part of our very important hearing today and allowing these issues to come forward. And with that, the committee stands adjourned.